Good evening, Dr. Jones and fellow classmates. Were you excited this past election when Barack Obama won over Governor Mitt Romney? I was too. But how would you feel if I told you that even though Barack Obama was the projected winner, Governor Mitt Romney could still win? How would you feel if I told you that you wasted your time? That 538 people are the people who really decide the next president of the United States? By the end of this, I want you to have a better understanding of how our voting system works and how the next president of the United States is actually chosen. I know that during these last few months, I was very excited about voting. There was many TV ads, rallies, and campaigns to go and get people out to vote. But people weren't really informed about how the voting system works. So, during this speech, I will discuss with you how the voting system works, the pros and cons of using this system, and why this system came about. The references for this speech includes howstuffworks.com, csmonitor.com, and also archives.gov. Now, why do we use this system? The reason we use this system is because our founding fathers needed a way to elect the president. Simply, some of the founding fathers wanted a popular vote system where all the Americans would choose the president. But some people believe that this gave too much power to the highly populated states. So other members of the founding fathers wanted a system where Congress actually picked the president. So what they had to do was compromise. The compromise that they came up with was called the Electoral College. Now, how this works is it combines the principles of allowing the major population to vote and also having a special committee to appoint the next president. So, how does the Electoral College work, you may ask? Well, according to my references, the Electoral College is made up of 538 electors. Now, they're from different states, and what they do is they pledge to vote for a certain candidate. So, each state has a number of electors, a certain number. This number of electors is chosen by how many people they have in the House of Representatives and also the Senate. So, in this graph, this map shows each state and how many electors they actually have. Now, you may notice that some states have a minimum amount of electors, while other states have many more. Now, this is because the number of House of Representative members that each state has is based off its population. And also, each state has 2 members of the Senate. So, what that does is it makes the states who have a bigger population have more electoral votes. So, in turn, they have more power to vote in the president. So, the number is comprised by 1, the House of Representatives, plus 2 Senates for each state. So, you take a state like California, which has 55. That means they have 2 Senate members, and they also have 53 House of Representative members. Okay, now, what does this do? This allows for the Electoral College to get together and vote for the president. Now, each political party chooses who they want their electors to be. And based off of that, the electors are voted by the majority of the people. And then they pledge to, in turn, vote for the candidate of which the people voted for them. So if they're a Democrat, they pledge to the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party trusted them enough to be an elector, they would run pretty much in the president's place. Even though you see the president's name, who you're actually voting for is that elector. So, this ends up being a problem, which we will discuss later. Okay, so the electors, they get the right to vote based off of how the state votes. So say the state votes for a Republican. That Republican elector will in turn have the right to vote. And the Democratic elector won't have the right to vote. So that state becomes Republican, and the Republican will give all this number of votes. Say California 55, remember that number? They'll have 55 electoral votes towards the president. Now, remember that 538 number? Well, the president needs more than half of those votes to win, which is 270. So, once the president reaches that number of electoral votes, after each states have voted, the president wins. So that's that magic number that you guys heard during election night, 270. That's where that number comes from. Now, there are some pros and cons to using this system. There's been a lot of controversy in the past about some of the flaws, in this system. Some of the flaws are, say the majority of people actually vote for one president candidate, say Barack Obama, but say that the presidential candidate doesn't win the number of electoral votes needed to actually win the presidential candidate, which is 270. Even though the majority of people voted actually for President Obama, Governor Mitt Romney would still win the election. So, that's a flaw. And actually, that has happened before. Expressed in this map, the year 2000, presidential candidate George W. Bush and presidential candidate Al Gore both ran for president. Now, as you can see, as expressed right here, Al Gore had about almost 60 million votes, and presidential candidate at the time, George W. Bush, only had about 50.5 million votes. So the majority of people in the country actually wanted Al Gore to be the next president. But because President George W. Bush actually won the major states that mattered, Texas and Florida was that big deciding factor, he actually won the presidency. So just because the majority of people voted for Al Gore didn't mean he won. Now that's a major flaw. Another flaw in this system is that many of the states do not have laws governing their electors. So, as you guys may remember, back when I said that the state votes for its electorate, so say Florida voted for President Obama by a major landslide of about 100 million votes. Okay, now that Democratic elector has pledged to vote to President Obama. But the thing is, he's not required by law to vote for President Obama. So he could always retract his vote and actually vote for Governor Mitt Romney. Expressed in this chart is the states that do not have laws governing how electors vote. It's a list of 24 states with a lot of electoral votes at stake, 257 to be exact. Now, it only takes 270 votes to win a presidential election. So say the electors wanted to all band together and vote for a different candidate. They could vote for that one candidate and vote him in. Now, that's a major problem because there's no fines, there's no nothing. Now, some states that do have laws, the law comprises of a fine of $1,000. And that's not a lot of money, especially to somebody who wants to pick a different president. Now, you may ask, why do we use this system? Well, it does have some advantages, especially back when our founding fathers made this system. One of the advantages was that the smaller states could overthrow the bigger states and swing the election. That was very important because a lot of people lived in those bigger states, and they would often vote for how they wanted to vote and run their country. So the smaller states, if they band together, they have more electoral votes and they're able to swing the elections. So that's a major advantage. Now, at this time, I'll take any questions that you guys may have. So, do you have any questions?
Earlier, you said that the electoral votes is 538, correct?
Yes, sir.
Does that include U.S. Virgin Islands or Puerto Rico?
No, sir. Now, the only territory that does include is Washington, D.C. And they have 3 electoral votes. So those other territories, they don't have the right to pick the president. You have to be in the mainland to pick the president. Any more questions? All right. Well, at this time, I would like to thank you guys for listening to my speech, and I like to stress the importance of learning how our systems are governed. And if we know how the Electoral College works, we get a in-depth view into our history of this United States, and we learn how, in fact, the presidents are elected. We know the weaknesses of our country, and we know the strengths. Thank you.